Hello and welcome back to The Shed. Today I would like to take a look at the 1976 Nebula award-winning novel in Frederik Pohl's Man Plus. So this is a rather interesting novel. It's written in the mysterious narrator's point of view, so we're not quite sure who the narrator is, but it does become apparent during the course of the novel. And what we find is that it tells the story of this guy called Roger Torroway. And Roger's the third in line in this Martian an attempt to colonize Mars. Because you see, the Earth is going through some pretty rough times. It's seen some pretty drastic wars. There's a whole lot of fighting and uncertainty because of food shortages. And the sort of president, the US president, the United States president, has taken it upon himself to start this Mars colonization attempt in order to sort of bring peace to humanity, right? And it's not done in the normal, typical way you'd expect, like you see in a lot of these Martian sort of, terraforming novels, right? But this is not a terraforming one. So I like the spin that Frederik Pohl's put on this one, because he's really looking at this not from, let's transform Mars, but let's transform human beings so they could basically live on the planet without any aid. So they do just exactly that, but the first experiment doesn't really go to plan. And the first Martian, who's been genetically modified with a whole bunch of mechanical implants, has died a sudden death, so they're not quite sure what happened to him. And we learned that Roger Torroway, he's the third in line, so there are a couple of people before him. And what we find is that this Roger guy is a pretty famous kind of person, but due to some unexpected circumstances, he finds himself first in line now, and he then begins on this transformation journey. But Roger's also having some marital problems. His relationship at home is not quite going the way as planned. He deeply loves his wife, but she's been unfaithful, and he sort of just realized that she's actually having an affair with one of his comrades and one of his best friends. So whilst he's getting experimented on, and there's a whole lot of stuff that happens to this guy, he goes through a whole lot of experiments, not so much experiments, but operations, where they're removing his vital organs and replacing them with mechanical ones and altering his perception of the world around him. They're doing all these really clever and wonderful hard science fiction stuff to this guy, right? In preparation for the journey to Mars. So they eventually get to Mars, and the question then is, will Roger reconcile his marriage with his wife? Is there any hope of that marriage reconciling? Will his body cope with the new Martian environment? Will this all be a complete waste of time? The more he was operated on, the more disconnected he was with humanity. So is this trip to Mars finally going to reunite him with humanity? And do we actually find out who this secret narrator is? All is to be revealed in this wonderful novel by Frederik Pohl. So what did I like about it? Look, I really enjoyed the hard science fiction elements. I thought it was really cool the way, Roger was modified. And this artist, this depiction here, I think is a pretty accurate one to what the novel suggests. So he's got these amazing bat wings that will allow him to, harness the sun's energy. His eyes have been modified. His skin has been modified. It's a pretty good artistic representation of what what is described in the novel. So I thought the transformation that Roger had to go through was both terrifying and fantastic. He really did turn into this monster of a human being in order to be able to live on the planet. So yes, I really did enjoy that surgically enhanced and just the spin, right? The spin on terraforming Mars or being able to live on Mars, where we're not looking at planet-wide changes, but interior changes, like what would we need to do to ourselves to sort of live on Mars comfortably. So I really like Frederik Pohl's approachable yet hard science fiction in this novel. I just love the way it's almost very believable, right? It's far-stretched, admittedly, but I think it is believable. Like, he's put enough science in there to make this plausible, and I really enjoyed that. I've always been a big fan of Frederik Pohl, right? So let me just come out with a disclaimer right there and then that I am a big fan of Frederik Pohl. I do enjoy his writing, and I think he does a wonderful job in this novel of bringing the hard science, but making it plausible and making it sound like, yeah, you know what, maybe one day we'll have the technology to be able to transform humans like this. Whether or not we'd want to or not, that leaves to be decided. But I thought he did a really good job of making this as realistic as potentially could be. The other thing I really enjoyed is the mysterious narrator, because throughout the whole novel, you're sort of thinking, well, who is this we people, right? Who is this? Is it one of his crewmates? Is it the people that are overseeing the experiments? And it asks all these questions around, well, exactly who is narrating this? Because it's almost this omniscient view of, you know, all the characters in the novel. So it sort of keeps you guessing right until almost the last page. So I did really like that mysterious narrator point of view. I think it had that element that I love in Frederik Pohl's writing, where he somehow always introduces a bit of mystery, right? So you're always sort of thinking, wow, you know, what's going on there? Who is this? Like, I just love that about Frederik Pohl. So the other thing I really enjoyed is Roger's transformation, and not just his physical transformation, but his emotional transformation as well. I really like the way he sort of had to come to grips with what he was becoming and some of the challenges. I mean, did this guy go through some challenges? I don't know if I could have stood up to what he had to go through, which in some ways makes it unrealistic, but in some ways makes it what I think is a great novel, right? But yeah, so I really like that transformation, what he had to go through, and his sort of acceptance at one point, right? You know, what it was to become who he was becoming. So I did enjoy that sort of journey that Roger had to go through. So what don't I like? Look, it's a good book, right? I've been a really big fan of Man Plus, but I'd say the thing that I struggled with this one was the plot itself. Because you have this president, right, this US president, who's sort of seeing what's going on around him in the world, and he's seeing that there's pretty much assured mutual destruction here. And the only way he thinks he can get out of it is that we need to demonstrate that Earth is not our only option, that we can actually go and colonize Mars. And that, I think, is okay. Well, most people on the planet probably will never get to Mars, and it'll probably take 100 years to fully colonize it to a point where we can start transferring people over to alleviate the pressure on the Earth. So I sort of found that bit a bit strange. I thought, well, I'm not sure if it's going to have the immediate effect the author was hoping to get. But the thing that really made me struggle, right, is that they're parading this guy around, right, in that format, right? So they're sort of saying, Earth, you know, it's done for, there's no real hope for Earth, we need to start colonizing another planet to alleviate the pressure, and we're going to transform you into something that looks like that. Right? And then I thought, well, is that really going to result in the Earth having peace, or are there going to be riots all through the streets thinking, I don't want to look like that, there's no way I want to look like that, right? So I just don't know. I found that to be really strange. And it wasn't like the operation that this poor sod had to go through was painless, right? He was in a world of pain going through all these procedures. So I don't know. I just found that a bit, I don't know, man. I don't know if this is the answer to this world crisis that we're facing, and whether or not parading someone that looks like that in the street as our salvation, which really looks straight out of mythical demonology, right? That if you were to say to a 13th, 14th century person, what does a demon look like? They'd probably paint a picture very similar to that, right? And I don't suspect that in a not too distant future, or in 1990 when the novel was set, that there wouldn't be a whole lot of people on Earth who would look at that and think, man, I don't want to turn into a demon, right? So, yeah, I found that bit a bit, yeah, I'm not quite sure. I don't know, the plot just lacked a little for me. And I can say the same thing about the characters. I enjoyed the character of Roger Holloway, but, you know, I've reviewed Gateway on this channel in the past with Robinette Broadhead, and I mentioned just how awesome of a character that Robinette Broadhead was, right? I love that protagonist in that novel, that anti-hero that we had in Broadhead, right? Robinette, because I thought it portrayed that flawed humanity, and I thought he was a complex character, and I thought he was a realistic character. I loved that character of Broadhead, but I can't say the same for Roger. I just don't know. It wasn't that he was a bad character, but I just thought, I don't know, it was a bit shallow, I suspect. I don't think we went deep enough into the characters in this novel for me to really become attached to these people in any way, shape or form. Also, I found that the women characters were sort of just okay. They weren't necessarily, you know, great or realistic. I don't know, I just found overall the characters were a little bit lacking for me. So that all sort of talks to why this book failed the memory test for me. So for those of you who are new to the channel, I've been putting all these Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels to a memory test. I read most of them, you know, 20, 25, 30 years ago, when I first decided I was going to, you know, go on this journey of reading all the Hugo and Nebula awards, which I'm re-embarking on, right, just to provide a new, fresh look at these novels. So the memory test is really how memorable were these novels for me. Have they stood the test of time? Do I actually remember them? And look, with Man Plus, I do remember the book, and I remember when I was reading through it that, yeah, I've definitely read the book. I'm familiar with the novel. I do recall the main character going through that transformation, basically becoming some kind of hybrid cyborg type human, right? So I remembered that quite clearly, but I couldn't remember any of the plot. I honestly couldn't remember if he got to Mars, whether or not the mission was a success. I forgot all about the actual mystery narrator, which I found really interesting this time around. So yeah, look, it failed the sort of memory test in that sense. Not as badly as some of the others that I've been reviewing on the Hugo and Nebula award-winning ladder, but I would have to say that, yeah, it was sort of in the middle of the bunch. I definitely remember the book, but the plot and the characters were pretty forgettable for me. So look, as far as recommendations, I am a big fan of Frederik Pohl, but I would say don't start your Frederik Pohl journey with Man Plus. It's a great book and I think you'll enjoy it, but I would rather much recommend you read something like Gateway and get a flavour for just how brilliant I think Frederik Pohl is. Because Gateway's got to be one of my all-time favourite novels, the whole series actually, the whole Hitchy saga. So I would have to say, look, if you've read Frederik Pohl and you've read a lot of Pohl, definitely have a go at Man Plus. You won't be disappointed. It is a good novel. But if it's your first foray into Pohl and you really want to know what the author's about, I'd say start with Gateway as being the better of the two novels that are on our Hugo and Nebula award-winning ladder. As a first science fiction novel, I think it's a fantastic one, right? So if I happen to be talking to someone who says, hey, look, I'm sort of interested in the, you know, colonizing Mars, but I'm sort of don't necessarily like the idea of, you know, transforming this planet, but alternative views on how we potentially could do that, then this is, I would say, yeah, man Plus, read it, you'll love it, right? Because it talks right to that niche. It's right about, well, how do we go and colonize a planet when it's just not habitable within our current body structure, right? So I thought it was wonderful for that sense. So yeah, highly recommend the novel. We've got to make a pretty tough decision today and rank it on our Hugo and Nebula award-winning ladder. So I'm going to set up, we'll flip the cameras around and do just that. So back to the shed ladder and ranking today's 1976 Nebula award-winning novel in Man Plus by Frederik Pohl. Now, we've got all the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels on the shed ladder that I've been ranking from ascending to descending order, on the A side to B side, from left to right. And I'm sort of don't think it's going to make the A side, because I'm looking at the A side and all these novels, I thought, with the exception of maybe Red Shirts, because I'm a bit biased with Red Shirts, but you know, we've got things like The Demolished Man, The Claw of Conciliator, Ringworld, Starship Troopers, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Stranger in a Strange Land. All these novels, right, I've got pretty decent plots and they've been really the pinnacle of science fiction, and so is Man Plus in many ways. I think it's a fantastic novel, but I just struggled with some of the realism of the plot itself, right? I just couldn't reconcile the plot with all the action and all the great stuff that was happening in the novel. So some of the criteria that I use in making these decisions, my input criteria, is, you know, just how well is the novel written, how strong is the plot, how strong are the characters, is it a memorable novel, how strong are the science fiction or fantasy themes. So we'll go through the criteria, but where this novel fell short for me was on the plot and on in some degree the character definition and the memory test. And when I look at all the books on the A side, most of them, if not all of them, have passed the memory test with flying colours. Most of them I've enjoyed or thoroughly enjoyed the plot. Most of them I found that the writing was pretty good, like a fantastic bit of writing, and the characters were well developed. So I don't think it's going to sit on the A side, but it's definitely going to sit towards the top of the B side, right? So for a good starting point, might just be Flowers for Algernon, right? Now with Flowers for Algernon, I mentioned several times on this channel now, Flowers has got to be one of my all-time favorite novels. The reason it's sitting on the top of the B side is because from a science fiction theme, how strong is a science fiction theme, like that input criteria that I use? For me, Flowers for Algernon was just a wonderful piece of literature, but it didn't have a whole lot of science fiction, right? And that's why the only reason it sits there, right? Because it's a surgery that's not yet available. And as soon as that surgery becomes available, if it ever becomes available, that would just then be a piece of fiction and wonderful foresight, right? But it's just a wonderfully written novel, and the characters are just wonderful that I'm not going to be able to rank, Man Plus over Flowers for Algernon. Now, Rite of Passage was, I think, a wonderful coming of an age novel. I really like Pension's writing in that Nebula 68 Nebula award-winning novel. I had a whole lot of really positive things to say for Rite of Passage. It stood the test of time pretty well as well, but I thought the plot was better. Right? I really enjoyed the plot in Rite of Passage, and I really liked a bit of a dark twist at the end of the novel, which I thought was brilliant. And I liked some of the philosophy sort of ideas that the novel brought up as well. It was a great book. I really enjoyed Rite of Passage. Now, with The Uplift and the Startide Rising, I'm going to bundle those books together because a lot of the input criteria as to why they're sitting there remains the same. I thought the writing was okay. It was definitely better in The Uplift War than it was in Startide Rising. But I thought the concept of Uplift was brilliant, right? I think it was a very strong science fiction element, science fiction theme. And the characters were pretty good. It stood it was fantastic when it came to the memory test. I've never forgotten The Uplift War and Startide Rising. It is a very memorable novel. So it definitely stood the test of time for me. The plot was decent as well, right? It was a bit dragging at times, but I thought the plot overall was an interesting plot. So I think it's going to be between Babel 17 by Samuel R. Delany and Relate the Sweet Bird Sang by Kate Wilhelm. And I think I'm going to put it just about above Babel 17. Man Plus. And the reason for that is that the characters in Babel 17 I didn't really care for too much at all, right? I thought they were a bit cliche and typical tropes. I mean, they had some really interesting characters as well, mind you, but I found the plot was okay. What I really liked about Babel 17 was that science fiction element of, language being used as a weapon. I love that concept, and I thought it was just wonderfully done in Babel 17. But I think overall, I enjoyed the writing in Man Plus better than I did Babel 17. I enjoyed the concept, of transforming humanity to colonize a planet like Mars by, enhancing their bodies with all these different science, technology, hearts and lungs and eyes and whatever the case may be. I just really enjoyed that, and I'm a big sucker for Frederik Pohl's writing. I do enjoy his writing and his exposition. So I thought it was a great novel. That's where it's going to sit today, just about above Babel 17. And just going through the rest of them, yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with that. I mean, Double Star was a pretty good book too, so look, it's there or thereabouts, right? But I'm going to lock it in. It's locked in. We're going to lock it in. And that's where it's going to sit for today. Hey, thank you for joining me in the shed. It's getting warm and it's not even 8 o'clock in the morning. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time in the shed.